So, entering the later half of the 20th century, basically since the advent of nuclear weapons, large scale global conflict has become too dangerous to be feasible. And we've talked about this a lot with the Cold War. So, states, especially larger international states, have had to explore new options in terms of conducting politics and exerting their influence globally. And this has led to the advent of what we call soft power. Um, Now, soft power is exerted in a number of different ways, the most common being economic through the use of sanctions, where certain countries are forbidden to trade in certain goods. In the developing world, this oftentimes looks like the withholding of aid or funding from more developed countries. An example of this would be in South Africa in the 1990s. One of the ways that they were pressured by the global community to put an end to apartheid was by withholding financial and military aid from some of their closer allies. Another method in which this is done is through the freezing of assets, specifically of certain corporations that are associated closely with specific states, denial of access to other intergovernmental organizations, and probably the most importantly especially in the developing world is the restriction of or the reducing of corporate investment. And this is something that has allowed major corporations, global transnational corporations, to operate on almost an equal footing with some of these smaller, less powerful states in the world, which is a very interesting trend that you guys should pay attention to going forward. In the political arena, again, withdrawal or denial to IGOs, the use of propaganda, especially on social media nowadays, material and cultural imperialism, which is, a genuine concern in a lot of the developing world because they are heavily reliant on cheap consumer goods and available media from the more developed world. And this has led to, in quite a lot of parts, some strong anti-globalization pushback. If you remember the Ed puzzle we did on the Iranian Revolution in 1979, a major factor in that revolution was the fact that the Iranian people were overwhelmingly sickened by the amount of cultural influence that the West and specifically the United States had on their society. Technologically, and this is probably one of the most powerful forms of soft power, especially going forward, would be cyber attack, denial of service and denial of access attacks, disinformation campaigns. And in terms of military power, which is not necessarily soft power, but it's softer, the kind of main source of military power is now what's known as measured response, meaning that smaller, more precise military strikes using laser guided weapons, smart bombs, small team or small unit action is what most international powers use in terms of their military access. Because again, globalized, large scale total war is just not feasible at this point. Now, here's the thing is soft power is not only accessible to large states. And it's not only used at the international level, it can be local and it can be individual. And social media has played a large role in this as well. The internet has allowed for the organization of both physical and economic protests in the forms of boycotts. Numerous large scale protests are organized via social media. The Arab Spring in 2010, at least in the initial stages, was almost exclusively organized through social media. There's also the advent of social justice warriors, especially again on social media. investigative journalism, media pressure, public opinion, all of these things weigh in on both states and corporations as a form of soft power. Now, the thing that allows soft power to really be effective is the fact that we live in an almost fully integrated, globalized marketplace. And we talked about this on the first slide. When you go to your local Walmart, your local Target, your local whatever place you go to buy random consumer goods, you are most likely purchasing a good that has traveled more than 1,000 miles to make its way here. I mean, that's generally true, especially if you were to live somewhere in like the more central regions of the United States, then it's almost assuredly true. And the reason that that is able to happen is because of what we call reintegration. Um, Prior to, I would say about 1905, definitely World War One, there was, although not as fast and not as efficient, a pretty globalized marketplace. Now that marketplace flowed generally only in one direction from the West out to the rest of the world, but all parts of the production process were integrated globally, meaning that labor was transported across the globe, materials were transported across the globe, products were transported across the globe for sale and consumption. Now, entering World War One and World War Two, with the ideological and the factional, and the factionism in those worlds, and then the complete and utter division of the globe during the Cold War into Western and communist blocs, really broke down large parts of this completely globalized marketplace. And basically, since the end of the Cold War, we have been slowly but surely reintegrating that, meaning that all parts of production are now globalized again. Um, your iPhone is probably the best possible example of a truly globalized product. The parts for the iPhone come from multiple locations, right? The electronics are fabricated in India and then shipped to China for assembly. The silica to make the screen is usually mined somewhere in West Africa and then processed again in either Vietnam or China and then shipped to China for um, assembly. The marketing is generally done by an American or British marketing firm in order to ship the product to a sales market in wherever, California, Florida, in order to be consumed, right? At the same time, you also had the advent of international money markets, where not only can money be transferred globally almost instantaneously, but currencies and stocks can be bought and sold as instantaneously on a global scale. If you want to purchase shares in an Indian tractor company, you can do that in about 5 minutes if you know where to look. If you want to purchase shares in a Vietnamese concrete corporation, you can do that in under 5 minutes. So the movement of wealth on a global scale is unlike anything we've ever seen before. I mean, it's only been in the past 200 years or so that actual physical land stopped being the primary source of wealth. And now we've reached a state where wealth not only can be transmitted digitally, but it can also be generated digitally with the advent of Bitcoin and blockchain and all of these other technologies. Another really important aspect of integration in the global markets is migration. And there are two kinds of migration that we generally see between the global north and the global south. The first is the migration of labor from the global south to the global north. Um, in some cases, this migrant labor is similar to the coolie labor of the 18th and 19th century, where these are um, unskilled workers, usually laboring in some sort of manual position versus also what's known globally as brain drain, where underdeveloped countries generally will see a mass outflux of their most highly educated populations to more developed countries because of issues of, cost of living, quality of life, and economic opportunity. On the reverse, however, you also have seen a trend in the past 30 years where there is a migration of jobs going from global north to global south. Because of the high cost of living, because of wage demands, what you see is that corporations are physically picking up and moving jobs to less developed countries where labor regulation and labor costs are lower and can boost their corporate profits. And then finally, the final piece in this puzzle, probably the most important piece of this puzzle, are MNCs and TNCs, multinational corporations and transnational corporations. These are corporations that are either owned and located in a single country but operate in multiple ones, or are even owned and operated in multiple countries simultaneously. And these corporations play a really integral role in reintegrating the global market after the Cold War. Not only do they provide jobs and income and allow for the building of wealth and the improvement of quality of life in the global south, but they also give manufacturers and influencers in the global north a lot more sway in the rest of the developing world. The amount of money that corporations like Apple or Nike have spent just in infrastructure alone in East Asia in order to better facilitate the production and the shipping of their products is well into the billions of dollars at this point. Um, Another interesting fact that I heard a few years back, and I'm not 100% sure if it's true, but if you look on a global scale, the number three private landowner in the world is McDonald's Corporation. McDonald's Corporation privately owns. This is not factoring in, you know, governments or states, but privately owned land around the globe. And this was at least a couple of years ago, 2013, 2014. The number three in the world was McDonald's Corp. So they physically own more land than, I would say, probably 70 to 75% of the governments in existence right now. Now, this reintegration of the global market has led to a new philosophy, a new ideology known as neoliberalism. And with the resurgence of globalized trade has come this idea of extreme laissez-faire economics. And we've talked about what laissez-faire capitalism looks like. It's very hands-off, it's low regulation, it's the invisible hand of the market. Neoliberalism is laissez-faire on a global scale on steroids. This means tariff reductions. This means no restrictions on trade, no restrictions on the migration of labor, no regulation of labor markets, meaning, things like minimum wage, safety conditions, no regulations on multinational corporations, very little or no consumer protections and regulations, and the privatization of all industries. And this is something that, while on the rise, has not come full scale yet. And it presents a lot of interesting opportunities, but it also prevents a lot of dangers. We've talked about in this class already the horrendous living and working conditions during the early years of industrialization because of this extreme hands-off economic ideology. And neoliberalism would have us introduce that on a truly global scale. So again, this is a case of who benefits, right? And generally, who's going to benefit are the people at the top, while the poorer classes are going to be the ones suffering in the name of globalized cheap consumer goods, right? Um, Now, this neoliberalism, which has been on the rise since the 1990s, has led to some positive things, though. There has been exponential economic growth, um, mainly focused in the global north, but living conditions in the global south have improved because of neoliberalism. Um, More opportunities for labor, cheaper, more available consumer goods, um, higher quality and standards of living in a lot of places. Um, if you watch the globalization video from Crash Course, John Green makes a really excellent point. For all of the negative aspects of globalization and how scary all of this is to people, more wealth has been generated and more people have been lifted out of poverty in the past 50 years than any other period in history. So while neoliberalism does present dangers to the poorest of the poor and unfair advantages to the richest of the rich, it has accomplished some serious good over the past 2 or 3 decades. Now, that doesn't mean that it's fair. While global income has been growing, there is also a massive growth in income disparity. In this country, we represent that with the idea of the 1%. And that's the idea, and it's not just an idea, it's a fact that in the United States, 1% of the population owns or controls roughly about 30% of all of the wealth. So that means the majority of the country's wealth, the country's economic production, and the country's economic influence is being controlled by a relatively small group of people, similar to an oligarchy. And this has been the source of numerous protests and pushback over the past 20 years.